Full electric cars are still in their infancy, but already there are several on the market. Models like this one, Peugeot's iON. The French brand claims that switching to the city car-sized runabout from something conventional would be pretty painless. They even reckon that despite the premium outlay required, the right kind of buyer will find that ownership costs add up too. And of course, the eco-benefits speak for themselves. Sooner or later, almost every major maker is going to have to offer some kind of electric power. And sure enough, we've seen all-electric prototypes of everything from a van to a Rolls-Royce. But having a prototype is one thing. Offering something that someone can actually buy is quite another. And Peugeot is one of the very few brands able to do just that with this car, the iON. Here's a maker with plenty of track record in this form of propulsion, with an electric history that goes all the way back to the VLV model of 1941, several hundred of which found their way onto the streets of Paris. In the years since, they've sold more electric cars than any other manufacturer, selling over 3,500 battery-charged versions of their 106 hatchback between 1995 and 2003. But very few of those made it to the UK, and even fewer are in private hands. If that's to change, and electric power is to make it mainstream, then much depends on this iON. This is a very different car to any electric vehicle Peugeot has brought us to date. Thanks to the demands of mobile phone and laptop users, more recent years have brought more advanced lithium-ion battery technology that promises some degree of everyday realism, both in terms of asking price and operating range. This iON makes good use of it, clothing batteries and electric motor with a design shared also by Mitsubishi and Citroën. This city car-sized machine must take on these rivals, Nissan's larger all-electric Leaf model and the E-Rev or extended range electric vehicles on offer from Vauxhall and Chevrolet that offer a smaller operating range but back it up with emergency petrol power. And like all of these rivals, it must offer enough running cost savings to justify a substantial purchasing outlay. In other words, this Peugeot has got to be very good indeed. Is it? Let's find out. Now, before we get into what this Peugeot's like to drive, let's think for a moment about how we use our cars and how far. Most vehicles, after all, are used for short trips. I think the average is about 20 miles a day. And recent surveys suggest that around 70% of the journeys we make are under 16 miles in duration, and 40% of those are under 3 miles. More tellingly still, it's estimated that most vehicles spent over 92% of their lives being parked up. And on that basis, an all-electric car like this one makes an awful lot of sense. If you're not convinced, major Peugeot dealers can rent you one for the day, so you can try it for yourself. So, what will your first impressions be? Well, it looks conventional from the outside, and sat here at the wheel, nothing changes. Ordinary switchgear, ordinary auto gear stick, ordinary instruments. Peer a little closer though, and it becomes clear that they aren't ordinary at all. Instead of a conventional speedo needle arcing round the digital MPH display, you get a needle that designates a power meter and moves through 3 coloured zones. Keep it in the green eco zone and you're looking at progress with minimal energy consumption. Put your foot down a little further and the needle will go rightwards into the white zone, which shows you that you're engaged in energy hungry driving. You're going to use the battery a lot. Slow down and the needle will go back leftwards into the blue charge zone, which means that brake regeneration is taking place and the battery is being recharged. To the top left of the power meter is what looks like a fuel gauge, but actually denotes your remaining battery charge, which isn't much use unless you know how far said charge might take you. For that, you've to look at the circular LCD display, the other side of the digital speedo, the other side of the power meter. And if you scroll through the various options, you'll eventually come to one showing you your remaining mileage range. It really should be more prominent. There's a conventional key that fits into a conventional ignition. But there's nothing ordinary about the silence that greets you when you twist it. Or about the way, once you get your ready beep, that this car shoots away from rest. It doesn't do so quite as quickly as its design stablemate, Mitsubishi's iMEV, but that's because this iON uses a simpler, more frugally orientated auto gearbox. Use the first portion of throttle travel and your Peugeot will be in eco mode. Give the throttle a firmer prod and the power plant surrenders the remainder of the useful 180 Newton meters of torque on offer. Despite that, from 0 to 30 miles an hour, it really does feel quite rapid. Quicker, in fact, Peugeot says, than a 150 brake horsepower version of its 207 hot hatch. But from 30 to 60 miles an hour, progress slows, culminating in a 0 to 60 mile an hour sprint time that's no better, but certainly no worse, at around 16 seconds than a conventional petrol city car. Get up to speed, and with around 64 brake horsepower on tap, there's a flat-out capability of 80 miles an hour, with enough overtaking punch to get you from 35 to 56 miles an hour in about 6 seconds. But approach either of those figures on any kind of regular basis, and you'll see the figure on the range indicator here dropping like a stone. And this is an indicator I think you're going to get pretty used to staring at if you regularly drive this car, because it's going to determine exactly how and when you can use this iON. Now, Peugeot reckons that this model has a range of up to 93 miles, but that seems to have been calculated on the basis of someone driving very slowly indeed. It's certainly not a figure I've ever seen on this indicator during my time with this car. But that's possibly because the electronics driving this range indicator are based on previous use, so very often artificially lowering a figure you can then extend with careful driving. Careful use of the heating and the air conditioning system will also help. You know this in your head, but if, as I did the other day, you come out in the morning to do a 50-mile round trip with just 56 miles showing on the range indicator, it's a worry you could do without. Or at least it is now. In the future, when so-called rapid charging points that are able to replenish up to 50% of your battery capacity with a 300-volt blast in just 15 minutes, or up to 80% in just 30 minutes, when these rapid charging points spring up around the country, then use of this kind of car will, of course, become far more flexible. For the time being, though, most of the charging points that are about take a fair bit longer than that. Some are of the so-called fast type that use a single or three-phase 32 amp supply to charge you from empty in 3 to 4 hours, but most will be of the slow charging kind, plugging into which will be just like plugging in at home. So it'll take you about 7 hours to charge the battery completely from empty, a process that'll probably cost you less than £2 in electricity charges. A few other things that I wondered about that you might also be concerned over. No, the battery doesn't leak charge over time, so you won't come back from holiday to find your car immobile. And no, there's no chance of you setting off while still connected up when you're charging. The ignition system is rendered immobile while you're all wired up to your power point. And there's no problem with just topping the battery up for short periods. You don't have to regularly discharge completely like you had to do with batteries in the old days. The standard package doesn't include the kind of useful sat-nav system you get on, say, a Nissan Leaf, which will show you when you're out and about where your nearest charging points are. But Peugeot has developed something similar, which with PC and smartphone access will show users not only the location of charging points, but the status of charge of their cars. In the absence of that, you're going to have to get organised before you set off, which shouldn't be too much of a problem. There are plenty of websites that'll show you where your nearest charging points are. Somewhere like www.ev-network.org.uk, for example. But a better site I've found is www.nextgreencar.com, because it shows you not only a map with all the UK charging points on it, but it designates the status of each charging point, so you know whether it's a rapid, a fast or a slow charger. Now you can find that map exactly on www.next-green-car.com/electric-vehicles/charging-points.php, and that's exactly where I've been to find my local charging point here. Now, to get your car on charge, someone like this, you'll need to buy a smart card from your local council. They cost about £50 upwards, depending on what part of the country you're in. And that's a fee that'll usually include the electricity you'll be using. Pay it, and you can use charging points like this as often as you want. Some councils include free parking too, but mine doesn't. And they've only provided a slow charger here, so plugging into this point will be just like plugging in at home. So what I'm going to be able to do while I go shopping now is to get a bit of a top up. Still, worth having, particularly as connecting this iON up is so mess and hassle free. The iON has two charging flaps, one on each side. One is for a rapid charging lead for those times when you're fortunate enough to find a rapid charging point, but that's on the other side. But on most occasions you're going to be plugging in out and about or at home to a fast, or in this case a slow charging point via this flap here that opens just like a petrol flap, so that you can very quickly connect up your lead. Then swipe your council smart card on the charge point, lift up the flap and put in your 3-point socket, and off you go. It's as simple as that. Now let's say I've finished my business meeting or my shopping and I'm ready to go again. Unplugging everything is just as simple, and I'm ready to trundle off again in the eerie silence that comes with electric motoring into the urban environment that is, of course, this car's preferred habitat. Like its EV rivals, this car's 47 kilowatt synchronous electric motor makes no noise whatsoever, which can in itself be a bit of a menace to dozy pedestrians or the partially sighted who aren't alerted to its presence, as they would be by the artificial noise created for safety purposes by a rival Nissan Leaf. Which means that you'll have to have your wits about you when inching down congested city streets or manoeuvring round car parks. These are situations in which the impressively tight 9-metre turning circle will really help, as does the finger-light power steering. Leave the city limits though, and that same lightness at the helm is less welcome. Still, handling is better than the tall stance and the skinny tyres might lead you to expect, thanks mainly to well-controlled body roll, which is courtesy of the placement of the heavy 240 kilogram 88-cell 16 kilowatt lithium-ion battery pack strategically beneath the floor in the centre of the car. That gives a very low centre of gravity and balanced stability. You do get a bit thrown about in crosswinds and in the wake of heavy HGVs, and there's plenty of tyre and wind noise. But the most abiding memory you take away with you after a drive in this car is probably how little you really need to use the brakes. Approach a tight corner, a junction or a roundabout, and the regenerative braking does most of the slowing down for you, replenishing battery energy as it goes. Such is the cleverness of modern technology. Now, though it may be true that Peugeot has borrowed this design from Mitsubishi, it's also the case that the French brand has perfected it. First, the Gallic designers tweaked up the cabin with nicer materials and plastics, as well as classy touches like this piano black trim around the centre console. Then they turned their attention to the all-important operating range, improving overrun charging and increasing the effect of regenerative braking, which together improved that operating range by about 30%. Now, these were changes quickly copied by Mitsubishi and built into their rival iMEV, which, as I've said, is the car upon which this one is based, itself a development shortcut. The iMeave, after all, is an electric version of the Mitsubishi citycar, a design dating back to 2006. Now, fortunately, the looks of the original were futuristic, meaning that this model doesn't look in any way dated. In fact, it's very smartly turned out, with a white and metallic lion badge on the bonnet. That's a feature of all zero-emission Peugeot cars. It's clearly a little sub-super mini city car, if a rather high-sided one. It's about 3.5 metres in length, you see, which makes it closer in size to something like a Peugeot 107 city runabout than anything super mini shaped. Although the 1.6 metres of height, as we'll see, makes it feel much bigger than a city car inside. Now, having to base this thing on a little city car wasn't ideal for Peugeot. Whereas rivals Nissan can point to a relatively small price gap between a top-spec diesel Focus-sized family hatchback and their comparably sized all-electric Leaf model, Peugeot acknowledges that there's a yawning price differential between something like their 107 city runabout and this iON. But they do point out that within the confines of its compact dimensions, this car offers a surprising amount of space inside. Let's see. True enough, it does feel surprisingly airy in here, the room on offer being thanks to the fact that the propulsion system for this design is very compact and the underfloor batteries don't really impinge on cabin space. You've got a 2.55 metre wheelbase here, which means despite the fact that the interior is very narrow, I mean this car is less than 1.6 metres in width, despite that, two adults will be quite comfortable in here on all but the longest journeys, as long as they're not rugby players. In fact, I'd suggest that you could quite happily, if you had to, fit 3 kids on this back seat. Or at least you would be able to, had Peugeot provided you with 3 sets of seatbelts. Rather irritatingly for families, there are only 2. At the wheel, where you sit rather higher than some drivers might like, you shouldn't expect standards of fit and finish common to the kind of executive car for which you'd pay a comparably high leasing fee. Still, the Japanese production line seems to have screwed everything together very well, and ergonomically the layout is sound with excellent all-round visibility. Taking a seat here for the first time, the only clue most would have that this was anything but a conventional petrol-powered city car would be the fact that the dash displays a petrol pump with, somewhat oddly, an electric plug hanging out of it. Small niggles include the curious lack of a clock and the difficulty of retrieving items from these narrow door bins once on the move. Now, boot space isn't huge. But despite the need to accommodate all those batteries under the floor, the 170 litre capacity you do get is 40 litres more than you get in a Peugeot 107. And you can make the best of it thanks to the way that you can angle these back seats to help you get more stuff in. And of course, as you'd expect, if you're only travelling 2 up or 3 up, you can push forward this split folding rear bench and free up a bit more space. Now, most cars are bought on a just-in-case basis. A 7-seater MPV, just in case you ever need to transport the kids' friends home from school. A family hatchback with a pokey engine, just in case your route home ever finds you alone on a twisty road. A 4x4 SUV, just in case you ever take that camping trip to the Highlands. In reality, of course, the just-in-case element is hardly ever used, leading to a price that needs to be paid not only by the owner in terms of excess fuel usage and emissions, but also by the planet. If we're going to be serious about green friendliness, automotive purchase decisions need to be a lot less just-in-case orientated and a lot more based on actual needs. The Peugeot iON is a first step in that direction, designed specifically for the shorter journeys that make up most of our daily mileage. Most families will have a second, larger, conventionally powered car for longer trips and holidays. And if they don't, well, Peugeot has thought of that too. They offer an innovative MU by Peugeot scheme at some of their bigger dealerships that will enable you to exchange your iON for a few days for almost anything else they make. An efficient diesel estate car for a weekend away perhaps, an MPV to go on holiday, a van for moving house, even a bike to get you fit. But there's a price to pay for iON ownership, or at least it seems that way at first glance. If you were to buy this car outright, you'd be looking at well over £28,000. And that's including the £5,000 government subsidy that's available on all electric cars of this type. It's an embarrassingly high price for a city car of this kind, so instead prospective buyers fortunate enough to find one of the handful of Peugeot dealers that can sell them one will probably be directed towards a 4-year, 40,000 mile lease, which includes everything but your minimal electricity costs. Now, prices of course will vary, but typically you're looking for a lease of this kind at something between £400 to £500 a month, depending on whether you can reclaim the VAT that business users of course will be able to get back. Yes, that's still a lot, but from that you've to subtract the massive savings you'll be making not only in fuel, maintenance and road tax, but also in the complete deletion of company car tax. Take off that little lot, sign up for one of these leases, and suddenly this car can start to look very affordable. It's priced identically to the Citroën version of this same design called the C0, but it's a few £1,000s pricier than the Mitsubishi interpretation, badged the iMEV. Mini and Smart have also developed all-electric cars, but they're very small 3-door models. Now, if you're going this route, you're more likely to be considering Nissan's Leaf, at least if you see a Leaf as directly comparable. The Nissan is, after all, a larger family hatchback class car. It's also quirkily styled. But in looking at this Peugeot, you won't only be considering all-electric cars. In fact, there are 3 other categories of vehicle that you'll probably want to bear in mind. The first concerning so-called E-Rev models, cars like Vauxhall's Ampera and Chevrolet's Volt, and they're available for the same kind of budget that'll buy you one of these. E-Rev stands for Extended Range Electric Vehicle. What are they? Well, essentially electric cars that have also a small petrol engine that kicks in on an emergency basis if you were to run out of range. Sounds ideal, doesn't it? But here too there are downsides. The main one being that the electric only range of an E-Rev is between 30 to 50 miles. That's all, compared to the 93 miles that you'll get in this iON. And that could mean, if you were to buy an E-Rev model, that you'd be running on petrol power rather a lot, which would then seem to defeat the point of going the electric route in the first place. The other 2 conceivable options for potential iON customers are really more conventional ones. Let's start with hybrids, you know, the Prius type petrol electric models where the petrol engine is continuously cutting in and out of battery power as needed. Now, you can't get a conventional hybrid quite as small as this Peugeot, but Honda and Toyota do offer hybrid versions of their Super Minis. That's the Honda Jazz and the Toyota Yaris, as well as hybrid family hatchback size models, the Honda Insight and the Toyota Auris HSD. Now, these latter 2 compete with a Peugeot hybrid. That's the Peugeot 3008 Hybrid 4. And this Hybrid 4 model can also, as an option, be ordered in plug-in form, which cuts its emissions in half. You can plug it in overnight, just as you can an all-electric car. The problem, though, with all hybrids is that they're quite pricey. In fact, £15,000 to £20,000 for a normal one, much more if you're looking at a plug-in model. And that means that when you start taking into account fuel, road tax and maintenance, areas in which an all-electric car has a big ongoing advantage, this iON will work out much cheaper over a typical ownership period. All of which explains why, in truth, it probably makes most sense to compare this to a conventional petrol city car, something like Peugeot's own 107. Now, the fact that this iON will cost you about 3 times as much if you were to buy it outright makes the all-electric option seem the far pricier one, however you slice and dice it. though as we'll see in cost of ownership, that might not necessarily be the case. But for many, it will come down to green friendliness, just how far they're prepared to go in their automotive choices to preserve the planet. And at least if after looking at the many options, you have decided to buy an iON, at least you won't be burdened further by having to trawl through an extensive model range. There's only one highly specified variant, and it includes 15-inch alloy wheels, front fog lamps, auto headlights with daytime running lamps, digital automatic air conditioning, power folding mirrors, a decent quality MP3 compatible CD stereo with Bluetooth for your mobile phone and a USB socket, leather trim for the steering wheel and gear knob, a height adjustable driver's seat, a trip computer and a 12-volt socket. You don't get satellite navigation. It's an option, which is a little surprising for such an expensive city-orientated car. Other options are limited to things like heated seats and metallic or pearlescent paint. But you do better, I think, to spend any remaining funds on systems to make your day-to-day charging easier. Now, Peugeot have come to a special arrangement with specialist EDF Energy that will see you being able to fit a special quick charging point to your household main supply. Standard, though, is the very clever Peugeot Connect rescue service. Should you ever have a problem, one push of this button with the brand's logo on it will connect you to help. Should you have been unfortunate enough to have an accident, then pressing this SOS button alongside it will connect you to a call centre who'll already know exactly where you are and who'll be able to send assistance. Should that accident have incapacitated you, then that assistance will be sent automatically. Hopefully, this car's safety provision will make an accident as unlikely as it can be. You get ESP stability control, all the usual electronic assistance for braking and traction, 6 airbags and ISOFIX child seat fastenings. Now, it's all very well for Peugeot to argue that this car costs just 3 pence per mile to run, as opposed to 11 pence per mile for a conventional diesel city car and 16 pence per mile for a conventional petrol-powered city car. That's fine, once you bought the thing. And therein, you might think, lies the catch. By 2020, 5% of the European new car market will be made up of sales of all-electric cars, and they'll therefore have become then much cheaper to buy. But for the time being, purchase of an all-electric vehicle like this seems to be a very expensive option, at least in terms of upfront price. Can it really add up on a cost-effective day-to-day basis? Most who've tested this car so far have said no, but I think they're wrong. Here's why. First up, the sums are going to inevitably look a lot rosier if, like most electric car buyers, you're purchasing this vehicle as a business tool or leasing it as an alternative to a conventional company car. With VAT reclaimable on leasing fees and no company car tax, it's pretty easy on this basis to justify almost any electric vehicle. But I'm going to start here with the worst case private buying scenario. Now, though in theory you could buy this car outright, 99% of customers will be taking up Peugeot's option of a 4-year, 40,000 mile lease. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, that lease were to stay at the price Peugeot launched it at. That's £415 a month plus VAT with no deposit required, so £498 including the VAT. So over 4 years, you'd have shelled out £23,904. And of course, you've got to add to that your charging costs. If you base that on 10,000 miles a year, with a charging cost of £2.50 per 120 miles, that's what Peugeot quotes, you'd be looking at paying out around £833 in extra electricity charges. So that's a grand total of £24,737. Sounds a lot, doesn't it? Until, that is, you properly cost out the alternative, which is, like everyone else, to buy a conventional petrol-powered city car. Let's say you spend an average £10,000 and you cover the same 4-year ownership term with the same 10,000 miles a year average mileage. Now, during that 4 years, you'd have shelled out around about £8,000 in petrol costs based on £6 a gallon and an average 30 miles to the gallon. You'd also have had to budget for around £4,000 in maintenance costs. They'd be free with this iON under the lease. Now, when you add all those figures together, the petrol, the maintenance and the upfront asking price, you get a grand total of £22,000. And that's just £2,700 less than it would have cost you to run this electric Peugeot. Okay, so if you'd gone the conventional petrol city car route, you'd have a car at the end of the 4 years to sell on or part exchange. But you can see how the electric car sums begin to add up, especially if you take into account that with this iON, you would have no need during that time to buy a road tax fund licence disc. You'd be relieved of the need to pay for parking in many cities. In Westminster, for example, that would save an urban dweller around £2,000 a year. And if you live anywhere near London in an iON, you'd have no need to pay the congestion charge either, which if you commuted into London every day would save you £2,500 a year. And of course, things start to look even better when you begin to consider the tax implications. Now, for companies, there's a 100% first-year write-down on business use, but let's consider here the personal tax implications. Let's say, for example, I was to choose to use this iON as my company car in preference to a more conventional company car choice. Let's say something like a Vauxhall Astra 2-litre CDTI SE Auto. If I was to do that, then I'd find an extra £300 or so in my pay packet each month. That would be like being given a bonus or a salary rise of £3,600 a year. As for the other issues you'll need to be aware of when running an iON, well, for a start, you'll need to know that not every Peugeot dealer can service the thing. By the end of 2011, just a handful of EV dealers had been appointed in the Peugeot network, though the number is rising all the time. Nevertheless, this might be an issue if your nearest stockist isn't close. Pricey Group 28 insurance will set you back a bit too, and you'll need to know that battery longevity will drop off once the car is sort of 5 years old to about 80% of original levels, but then by that time most owners will have traded their electric vehicle in for another one. Still, it might have an effect on resale values, though these will be bolstered by the impressive 8-year, 80,000 mile warranty that Peugeot includes, covering the battery pack, the electric motor and the car itself. That, by the way, is far better than you get with a rival Mitsubishi i-MiEV. Charging time will occupy around 7 hours overnight, but if I owned this car, I'd want to take advantage of the deal that Peugeot has negotiated with electricity provider EDF Energy. Now, for around £800, EDF, following a home survey, will install a dedicated charging point at your home that will reduce charging times by around 35%. The package also includes a timer for easy off-peak recharging, a smart meter, and an EV consumption statement, so you can see exactly how much it's costing to charge up your car. And there's also a 3-year warranty on the charging point. EDF also offers customers a 2020 eco tariff, which gives them electricity charge reductions of up to 20% during evenings and weekends when they're most likely to be charging their cars. Now, if you are buying this car for eco reasons, one thing that's definitely worth bearing in mind is the source of your electricity supply. After all, if you're going to be charging this Peugeot up from a supply derived from a filthy coal-powered electricity station, then your planet-saving credentials are going to be severely dented. Better to use an electricity supplier that has a gas power station, or even better, a nuclear or renewable energy power station. Now, to show you the difference this can make, experts have estimated that if you were to charge an electric car up normally, a car like this would put out a CO2 figure when everything's taken into account that would equate to about 44 grams per kilometre. If, on the other hand, the power it uses were to be sourced from a nuclear power station, such as EDF Energy use, for example, then that figure would fall to 25 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now, some energy suppliers offer a so-called green tariff, where they guarantee that for every unit of electricity you purchase, they source a stated amount of renewable energy. It may cost you a bit more, but at least you'll be safe in the knowledge that you're doing your bit in helping that provider safeguard the future of sustainable energy. Now, it's hard to think of a more eco-conscious brand than this one. From extra frugal diesels to plug-in hybrids, Peugeot has stayed at the forefront of the recent automotive drive towards more green-friendly motoring. A drive that had, at least to some extent, to offer the option of all-electric power. It would have been fascinating to see what this French maker would have produced if, like rivals Nissan, they'd have been able to create their approach to this from scratch. Still, even in adopting Mitsubishi technology for this little iON, they've been able to show the Japanese maker a thing or two about what the market wants from a car of this kind. Of course, what the market really wants, low asking prices and a 200 to 300 mile operating range, current technology can't yet supply. But within the confines of what a car of this kind can deliver, Peugeot have done a pretty good job. Yes, the asking price does seem high, even if you spread it over a 4-year lease, as Peugeot suggests. But if you take tax and fuel savings into account, it is possible to justify such an outlay over that kind of ownership period. The 93-mile operating range can be justified too. After all, it will suit owners 80% of the time. And when it doesn't, well, just rent a vehicle that does, something that the MU by Peugeot rental scheme can help with. Overall, I've rarely come across a car so difficult to justify at first glance that made so much sense on closer inspection. Yes, it's rather small, but as a second or third car or as an urban runabout, you're going to want that. Yes, you'll need a garage to recharge it. And an eco-friendly mindset, a financial approach that plays the long game, and a short mileage lifestyle. These can be difficult boxes to tick, but then perhaps that's as it should be. The reward, after all, for doing so is ownership of one of the most eco-friendly cars on the planet. Proof that, as Peugeot says, electricity really does rhyme with reality.